The type, as y'all can see by the title of today's video, man, the debate is over, right? So many motherfuckers want to try to play my ancestors. Oh, ancient Egyptians wasn't black. Whoopty whoopty woo. The pyramids built by aliens, white people, all this and that, man. Listen, we gonna cut all the controversy. We gonna get to it. Let's get to it. Let's get to it. Let's get to it. Yeah. Yeah. Look. What they say, the truth hurt, but it shall set you free. Let's go. Oh shit. Nah, I ain't cutting that shit out. I ain't gonna feel like it. I already know me.
We don't have Egyptians of European descent in Egypt. We have a population which is basically a mixture of ancient Egyptian blacks who intermarried with Arabs right after the Arab conquest. The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black before the Arab conquest. But before the Arab conquest came the Greeks. It was ancient. The ancient Egyptian population was in Egypt for thousands of years.
And I just want to say, pyramids wasn't just in Africa, Egypt, okay? They could have pyramids all in the Americas they found. You even have pyramids in Australia, okay? So, what the fuck are we really talking about?
The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black, and the Greeks came in 300 BC, and they started to intermarry with the local population. And then the Romans came and ruled from 70 BC until they were conquered by the Arabs and kicked out by the Arabs in the 7th century. And these people intermarried with the Egyptian Copts, and they made the pigmentation of the Egyptians, the Copts, much lighter because of this intermarriage with Europeans.
Egyptians are black. The real Egyptians are black. Because the real Egyptians, they are real Africans. So those people in Lower Egypt, you see, in Cairo, Alexandria, and the Falahins area, they're mixed between the Turkish, Mamluks, French, English, Romans. So those people who come to attack Egypt in that time, they couldn't come to Upper Egypt, to the south, which we still had the same color, our dark color or black color. So they couldn't mix with us.
How could you know that the Egyptians was black when you just look at the hieroglyphs and it just shows what the fuck it is?
Nubians and Egyptians, they were not white. They are black Africans.
I like to follow the evidence, and to me, I didn't care about which race of humans it was at the time.
But you did point out that Egyptian guidebooks that were popular had some very racist descriptions about the attitude of Egyptians toward different racial groups.
Yes, you'll see even in current guidebooks probably a kind of a hierarchical description of the views of the races, yes.
So many Egyptians today who probably think of themselves primarily as Mediterranean people, even though they're on the African continent, look down at the idea that a very powerful ancient culture might have emerged out of Black Africa.
Yeah, and it's clearly obvious a modern ethnic view or ethnic mindset that leads to that kind of thinking, and not any evidence from ancient history.
Know thyself. Let's get into it. Let's get into it.
History was written by the victor, and the victorious will often attempt to wipe out every trace of their enemy's existence. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of lost civilizations that have succumbed to collapse, invasion, or amalgamation, and a plethora of lost languages. This education and indoctrination has long been a tool of conquerors to influence the hearts and minds of a population.
Listen, y'all. So look, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do 2 parts of a video. I'm gonna do 2 parts of the video, right? My fucking storage, my fucking phone just went out of fucking storage, y'all. You can't make this shit up. So fuck it, we're gonna keep thugging. We're gonna react to the rest of this shit. With my input, I'm gonna still be talking, but we just gonna do it like this.
Under our current system of capitalism, this strategy was instrumental in the Western world's rise to glory. A new tactic was employed for the first time in recorded history, which was chattel slavery. Slavery has existed since the beginning of time, and indentured servitude has been employed widely. But this new iteration of slavery was extremely cruel and barbaric by comparison. During the 15th and 16th centuries, European royalty was vastly outnumbered by commoners and slaves. In order to maintain power, they created a caste system to keep people divided. It is in this space where European elites conceptualized the contemporary concepts of class and race.
During the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking.
White people are only 6,000 years old, man. I did whole videos on genetic splicing and how a lack of melanin make you more prone to being able to be genetically spliced because melanin absorbs UV rays. So let's get into it.
We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other.
Talk about it, bro. Let's fucking talk about this shit, bro. Let's fucking talk about this shit.
I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count. That's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote-unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately, the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans.
In order for this new form,
That's it. And that's what you call. That's what you would call fucking elites, y'all. The fucking elites.
slavery to operate smoothly, they had to completely dehumanize Africans, so they were seen as nothing more than animals. They had to convince the world that they were savages and had no culture or civilization. They did this by creating the myth of the Dark Continent to justify colonialism and legitimize the enslavement of Africans. They created the term sub-Saharan to suggest black Africans were only present below the Sahara. But if you look closely at the historical record, you will see that they are in fact indigenous to the entire continent and prevalent within the Mediterranean as well.
When referring to black Africans, the term sub-Saharan is also slightly inappropriate for the period, which is why I'm not using it, as black people weren't only present south of the Sahara Desert, and there is a lot of evidence for that. In the classical period, instead, the Mediterranean is seen as an unifying sea, used and exploited by Greeks and Phoenicians, just to mention a few, to colonize, but also to trade. The Mediterranean Sea is a connection to Africa, not a barrier. Now, because of this, the Cretan world had a documented presence of black people, which we find in the Minoic civilization, and the same can be said also about the Mycenaean world of mainland Greece. We see black individuals in Minoan representations of the Bronze Age, and because of the extreme diversity of representations, musicians, warriors, traders, etc., we can understand that they had entered fully into the Minoan social fabric. And as we said, we have a very similar situation with the Mycenaean world, starting from the 14th century BC, and by the 9th century, this would be commonplace.
Modern concepts of race and ethnicity can be tricky because the ancients did not consider skin color the source of identity. The term black, as it is regarded today, denotes race and was created to sow division. In the old world, your tribal ties or nation state was the dominant factor of how one viewed himself and others. Skin color was but a superficial trivia.
Darwin essentially suggested that in order...
This racist ass nigga, yo. It's the nigga that created the evolution theory that believed... Look it up, it's called Darwinism. He believed white people were the modern slave and they were naturally selected to be better in contrast to other races and all of this bullshit. Let's get into it though.
You say that a species was subdivided into subspecies, which would be the equivalent of races, and that the populations involved would have to be almost incipient species. Okay, so a high degree of substructure. I can tell you that you cannot use the idea of any difference or being able to tell a difference either at the molecular level or physical level as indicative of or requiring the use of the term race. So I say there are populations, but no races, and I'm not the first person to say that. All of these people are connected to each other, and dividing them in a way that implies a level of discreteness that the term race implies is inappropriate. Were there people with darker skin, lighter skin, curlier hair, less curly hair? Yes, there were. There's no evidence that they had a theory of human variation that would be commensurate or similar to notions of race as they were developed in Europe.
When Narmer came from the south, he conquered the Delta region, uniting Lower and Upper Kemet. Upper Kemet would serve as the political, spiritual, and power center of the nation. Lower Kemet in these times were inhospitable, and the Delta was but a wet marshland. But in the seasonally dry channels of the Second Cataract, early African farmers learned to manage parts of the river's annual flood. This knowledge would be transferred into Kemet's wide floodplain, giving rise to the early Nakata civilization in Upper Kemet. They used the thousands of years of accumulated knowledge to accurately predict the flood season and transfer the wet marshlands of the Delta into the world's most fertile farmland. They would also use this knowledge to build the Great Pyramids. Their mastery of sacred geometry allowed them to align the Great Pyramids nearly perfectly along the cardinal points, north, east, south, and west, within 1/15 of a degree of true north. Although each was their own nation with its own identity, Temeri, Ta-Netjer, and Teseti were connected culturally, commercially, and spiritually. The cultural exchange between these three Nile Valley civilizations was fluid. The emergence of Kemet was an evolution of African science, philosophy, and agriculture, which seeded the very foundations of civilization.
That's hard. I like that.
So the Greeks traveled to Egypt and said that the Egyptians were the faultless people. They said that they were the greatest people on earth, the most beautiful people on earth. They went to Egypt. The Greek
Bro, if you look it up, ancient Greeks often fucking went off of ancient Egypt. Historically, like, they were inspired by them, all of that kind of stuff.
Went to Egypt to study mathematics. Pythagoras spent 23 years studying math in Egypt. The Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, was used in Kemet to build the pyramid at least 2,000 years before Pythagoras was born. Hippocrates, the Greek father of medicine, acknowledges Imhotep as the father of medicine. Imhotep was
If you don't know, also the Hippocratic Oath is what the doctors use. So the doctors use Hippocratic Oath, and who the fuck studied the Hippocratic Oath? This nigga. Where the fuck did this nigga study at? In ancient Egypt. He just used it and twisted it for his own agenda, like they always fucking do.
Of the step pyramid at Saqqara. The columns that are referred to as Greek columns, you can find them at Saqqara. So the elements of Greek design, Roman design, Greek philosophy, all had their beginnings in ancient Kemet or Egypt. Around 1919, Breasted wrote an incredible book that documented his travels in Egypt and described the ancient Egyptians as dark-skinned people with woolly hair who were not unlike the Nubians who live in Egypt now. Well, this book is called Ancient Times, and it was a favorite book of John D. Rockefeller. He read it to his children all the time. And then Rockefeller decided to fund Breasted, gave him $1.5 million to establish the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. But he also had caveats with that contribution, in that in the second edition of Ancient Times, which was published around 1935, Breasted removed all references to the ancient Egyptians as being dark-skinned people, and he added a new chapter where he said that they were members of the Great White Race. Most of what we know about Egypt is viewed through Greek and Roman eyes. Egypt is a Greek word. Sphinx is a Greek word. Pyramid is a Greek word. So until we can begin to interpret this indigenous African culture and civilization through an African lens, then we will always view them from a disadvantage. But there's Reisner, George Reisner, who excavated in Sudan, and so many others who saw the historical truth, saw that black people who have been marginalized in this country and around the world, who have been enslaved because Pope Eugenius IV said that black people had no souls. So people did not look upon us as people who created anything of value. So I can understand how racists would say, oh no, well, these buildings could not have been built by black people. They don't have intelligence. These black people could not have written these great scripts. So they were operating under a false system of white superiority. So when they were confronted with great scripts.
I heard that. A false system of white superiority.
So they were operating under a false system of white superiority. So when they were confronted with historical reality, they suffered what's referred to in psychology as an identity quake, cognitive dissonance. They couldn't connect the dots, so they fabricated historical lies. And so the work that we're currently engaged in right now is to tell the truth. We are literally digging up the truth, and the truth speaks for itself.
For a fact.
We're here in Soho, one of the busiest parts in all of New York City, where we built a quiet capsule. Inside of that quiet capsule,
Reisner's writings about the Kushites are a window into his warped racial beliefs. Its very race appears to be a product of its poverty and its isolation. A Negroid Egyptian mixture fused together on a desert riverbank, too far away and too poor to attract a stronger and better race.
Even as he was awed by the pyramids he excavated, he refused to believe they could have been built by the ancestors of the black Africans he saw all around him.
I don't know, like, why. And this is the thing about his story. His story is like, I'm even reading this book titled Know Thyself. It's so hard for them to accept our greatness, y'all. It's so hard for them to accept that shit. And that shit, and it's bro, it's a, like, my nigga. I can't even find a word to describe it. It just showed me words too to describe it. Like, these motherfuckers deliberately, literally deliberately, are erasing who the fuck we is, my nigga. Literally, bro.
His prejudices even seem to have clouded his eyesight. In 1916, when he discovered beautiful black granite statues of the great Kushite kings, he argued they were not real likenesses. Instead, he proposed that the kings and the builders of all the Kushite monuments had actually been light-skinned foreigners.
Why is it so hard for you to accept?
The discipline of Egyptology has its origins with the invasion of Egypt by Napoleon Bonaparte in the late 18th century. Napoleon's army would defeat the Ottoman Empire at a time when European colonism was nearing its zenith. The Ottoman Empire, also known as the Turkish Empire, rose to prominence in the 12th century with the help of the Mamluks. The Mamluks, which translates to one who is owned, were an Eastern European population of slave soldiers who overthrew their rulers and came into power. In 1798, Napoleon led the French army into Egypt, swiftly conquering Alexandria and Cairo. The Battle of the Pyramids marked the beginning of the end, 7 centuries of Ottoman and Mamluk rule in Egypt. When Napoleon invaded Egypt, he brought along an army of scholars whose studies during French occupation became the foundation of Egyptology. This field of study was employed to promote the idea of European imperialism. Jean-Léon Gérome's painting, Bonaparte Before the Sphinx, captures Napoleon's instinct that the glory of ancient Egypt could be harnessed to exalt French colonial power.
Many of the early archaeologists came to the study of ancient Egypt and ancient Nubia from the perspective of Semitic languages or the study of the Hebrew Bible, and it was very important to them to bring Egypt specifically into the sphere of biblical studies. And so they had to carve Egypt away from Africa to bring it into that sphere. And the way that they did that was they used race. So these early archaeologists effectively made ancient Egypt white in the sense that they made it part of a dominant Western culture, and ancient Nubia was separated from that. It was black. And this was how they took Egypt out of Africa and put it into this Semitic sphere, this biblical sphere. And so it's imperative that we go back and continually reassess the things that we take as facts.
Well, how are we gonna do that when y'all make it so motherfucking hard for us just to know the facts? Like, this shit is aggravating, yo. Like, for real. We built all this great shit. You got us thinking we just niggas, boy. You got us thinking we just some low vibrational motherfuckers that can't achieve shit, nigga. If you don't know your ancestors walk around in gold sandals and all this other shit, how the fuck you gonna see your greatness in yourself? Your ancestors seen they great. Man, listen, this why, man, listen. Let's just watch the video. Man, listen, go ahead.
Western academia's anti-African sentiment has contaminated the fields of Egyptology and anthropology. From their very inception, these institutions have been rooted in racism. In 1912, German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt discovered the famous bust of Queen Nefertiti in a region of Egypt called Tel El Amarna. It would later be unveiled to the general public in 1923 at the Egyptian Museum of Berlin in Germany and became the standard of beauty and a cultural symbol for Berlin and Egypt alike. However, the sculpture has been the subject of heated debates, and many scholars have gone on record to question its authenticity. After 20 years of research, Henry Sterren, a Swiss historian, made the shocking revelation that the bust of Nefertiti is actually a fraud. And in the documentary, The Mysteries of the Nefertiti Bust, he lays out the compelling evidence.
What first made the academics suspicious was the exceptional state of conservation of Nefertiti's bust when it was discovered. The object was incongruous. It bore no resemblance to any other 3,300-year-old busts from Egypt. 2
To historian Henri Sterlin, the bust of Nefertiti is simply too well preserved, or, as he puts it, too new to be true. Numerous archaeologists, Americans, Italians, French, have expressed their doubts about whether the bust is genuine, but none of them have made their doubts official. So we've decided to stage our own inquiry. Borchardt is very precise in his notes from the dig. He states he found large quantities of pigment, adding they were all still quite usable. But if this was an experimental copy, how is it Borchardt never spoke of it to his team, nor in his meticulous notes? According to the historian, on the 5th of December, 1912, the archaeologist was in Cairo. He learns that one of Germany's princely families is passing through and wants to visit his archaeological digs. Caught unprepared, Borchardt rushes back to Tel El Amarna. He arrives on the 6th of December, 1912, which was meant to be a day off for his workers. He immediately sets them back to work. Later, he proudly shows their highnesses the fruits of his labor. In an excess of zeal, one of the dig foremen, an Egyptian called Senussi, disappears briefly during the visit, then returns with a bust of Nefertiti. The royals are delighted with such a masterpiece, and a photograph immortalizes the moment, leaving Borchardt apparently no time to explain it was a copy and not the real thing. Henri Sterlin claims the photo is what trapped the archaeologist. You couldn't just tell the royal visitors who are enthusing over the object, listen, you're mistaken, it's ridiculous. It would make a mockery of the royals. It was simply not possible to tell the truth, or the royals might have been covered in ridicule, and that would have been lèse-majesté, or treason, which at the time was very serious indeed and could have ruined Borchardt's career and life for good. I've no doubt in my mind that this is a fake, a copy, a phony.
During the Second Reich, the Germans were coming about with a philosophy to justify further expansion, colonialism and imperialism. And in an attempt to do that, they claimed to be the discoverers of many sets of different artifacts, one of them being this head. But in fact, what it was something created at the time or just afterwards to justify their ideas of colonialism and imperialism.
But this was far from an isolated incident. In 2018, paleo artist Elizabeth Days unveiled a facial reconstruction based on the fraudulent Nefertiti bust, which further Europeanized her features. And in 2005, Dr. Zahi Hawass, Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, announced the results of a digital reconstruction of the face of Queen Nefertiti's son, King Tutankhamun. However, the relief on the back of his royal throne of him and his wife, Queen Ankhesenamun, shows a dark brown skin tone and features that resemble populations found in modern-day Sudan and the Horn of Africa. With discrepancies so glaringly obvious, one has to wonder what other liberties have been taken behind closed doors.
You cannot make this shit up.
A concerted effort has also been made in Hollywood to whitewash ancient Kemet. Television and film have promoted the idea of a European Egypt for decades. But when we look at the temple walls, we see a melanated population with a variety of skin tones and hairstyles, such as afros, waves, braids, and locks. Indeed, the discovery of the Rosetta Stone and translation of the ancient hieroglyphs, originally known as Medu Neter, made Western scholars rethink their narrative. The newly transcribed inscriptions revealed an advanced culture that had attained an exceptionally high level of development. They coined the term Sub-Saharan Africa as a way to separate the genius of Egypt from the rest of the continent.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the study of antiquity and the Middle Ages. As always, I'm your host, Nick Barksdale, and today we are joined once again by Dr. Rebecca Futo-Kennedy, who's going to take us through a thought-provoking episode on the term Sub-Saharan and the whitewashing of ancient North Africa.
This idea, this like sort of continually trying to find this idea of separating out North Africa from Sub-Saharan, as if the Sahara was the impermeable boundary that nobody could get through, is really a continually problematic type of argument. Particularly since we have early texts that tell us that, right, Herodotus tells us that, he says the Ethiopians and the Garamantes are indigenous to North Africa, and that, of course, the Phoenicians and the Greeks are not. But he makes it very clear that people he called Ethiopians are indigenous to North Africa, and Northwest Africa in particular, right? But they are not Sub-Saharan. So I constantly, what is the obsession that people have with this idea of Sub-Saharan, that whenever they ask any question, what they're trying to do is prove that Sub-Saharan Africans aren't part of the ancient Mediterranean world, which we know is false. Not only do we know, of course, that people that we would call, quote unquote, Sub-Saharan Africans ruled Egypt before the Persians got there, among others, but that they have this continual culture that runs up and down the Nile. And we know from our ancient sources that they believed very firmly, and they interacted with what in the area they called Libya, right?
You see the lengths they go to try to get you to not know who the fuck you is? You see the fucking lengths? I'm gonna make this into multiple parts, y'all, to make it more convenient for y'all, because I know motherfuckers' attention spans be fucked up. If y'all interested, go watch part 2.